region. She has more than 10 years of experience in the healthcare and nonprofit industries, and she most recently served as CFO of a community health center in Cincinnati. She provides consulting services to healthcare organizations in the areas of grant compliance, especially around time and effort reporting, software system optimization and implementation, project management, process improvement, financial assessments, and helping finance departments prepare for their in-house pharmacy. With her background as a CFO, she understands the challenges that healthcare organizations face and approaches every project as an opportunity to provide unmatched client experience. So with that being said, Katie, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is staying warm and digging out of the snow. And I think y'all probably got some freezing rain and some sleet. I'm up here in the Dayton, Ohio area. So we got about 12 or 13 inches of snow. So a decent amount of snow. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So today we have a session for you called So Much Opportunity, Diversifying Your Funding Streams. We did not know that when we were preparing this session name that it would be so significant to the weather outside. So it was pretty fitting that it matched with the timing with the storm. I was going to dinner with my parents on Saturday, and we were driving and we were just noticing that there was no snow on the ground, and, in less than 24 hours, everything was going to be covered in snow. The roads were going to be bad. So it's just a reminder and a good segue that the only constant is change, right? We know that there's always going to be change happening. Today, the key focus areas that we're going to talk about are reducing reliance on a single primary funding source. We're going to identify new revenue opportunities and partnerships, understanding value-based care and alternative funding models, assessing financial risk and long-term sustainability, and prioritizing initiatives for the greatest impact. So why diversification matters? Concentrated revenue streams can create financial risks for FQHCs. With the change in administration last year, I know some folks experienced some delays in funding due to, PMS or HRSA wanting more information about the drawdowns. So we're always, kind of at risk for that, and at risk, for government funding. And, there can always be delays that come with that. Spreading risk through diversification. So diversifying your income sources. So, not only looking at, the main 330 grant that you get, but looking at other grant opportunities, other partnership opportunities. Maybe there are other nonprofits in your area that you can partner with. Supporting innovative programs. Diversification enables investment in other programs. Maybe you can add dental services or behavioral health services that will improve patient care and also generate revenue for your health center. And diversification ensures resources to provide comprehensive care despite funding fluctuations, which supports the FQHC mission. So some current challenges. We definitely have some current challenges that we're facing. Shrinking grants and increased competition can reduce consistent funding, which can challenge your financial stability. Reimbursement delays in Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements can strain cash flow. The 340B rebate model, we know that is on hold, but we were all scrambling to get prepared for that at the first of the year. And of course, we still have manufacturer restrictions on contract pharmacies that can make things challenging. Rising operational costs. We saw this grow significantly during COVID. A lot of our larger health systems were able to, pay bonuses to recruit employees, and it made it a little complicated for health centers, more challenging. And we know that the costs are just rising across the board, not only salaries, but everything, supplies and everything. And compliance burdens. So, it's great to get grants and federal funding and state and local funding, but those also come with strings attached, or, there's a lot of red tape sometimes that we have to navigate our way through to be able to do the reporting that they want us to do, to be able to invoice them and to get the funds that we need. So it's definitely some strings attached there. So reducing reliance on a single primary funding source. So, I think it's important to, first of all, review your current funding so that you know where you stand. What percentage of your revenue is from grants, what percentage is from patient service revenue, kind of understanding where you're at, where the starting point is important. Identifying funding dependencies. So understanding that reliance on primary funders is critical for recognizing areas of high dependency risk. So maybe if, all of your funding comes from the federal government, that could be risky. So you want to take those things into consideration. And you want to make sure that you have, that you're planning your diversification strategies. So bringing the necessary people to the table to talk about, what does diversification look like at your health center? And so some strategies for diversification, expanding grant applications. So increasing the number and variety of grants can broaden your funding opportunities instead of just relying on one source. Fee for service offerings, developing services that will help generate revenue for you. Engaging donors is also important. And I have found that when engaging donors, a lot of donors want a specific, project or initiative to donate to. So, for example, let's say that you were considering a mobile unit and you wanted to raise funds for that. I feel like it's easier to engage with donors when you have specific projects and donors get excited about that. And they're more easily engaged when there's a specific initiative maybe that you're planning. You can also, engage donors just to get funds, general funds that will go to, where it's needed most. But I think that can be a little bit more challenging than having a specific project for them to support and donate to. And cultivating partnerships, right? So there may be other nonprofits in the area working with hospitals, just really, thinking outside the box in terms of partnerships and how you can cultivate those and work with others in your community. So identifying new opportunities. So grant funding. So grants from federal, state, and private foundations are vital. Value-based care incentives, and we'll talk a little bit more. We'll go a little bit deeper on each of these as we go here. Again, ancillary service expansion, like I mentioned, and partnerships and social enterprise. So when we talk about grant strategy, you want to make sure that you are targeting grants that are aligned with your mission. Sometimes we think, well, there's money out there. Let's just go grab up all the money. And I think sometimes it's important to be more strategic about the grants that you are applying for and ensuring that, that your health center can meet the program requirements that are outlined in the grant. Oftentimes we may get, we get excited when there's a grant that comes out, or, maybe it's a decent amount of money, but we haven't thought it all the way through. And so it's important that we think about all the steps of that grant process. Having a grant writer on staff can be really crucial. And a lot of times, if they're able to, bring in enough money throughout the year, then, they've paid for themselves in terms of salary. So you want to make sure that you have grant writing capacity. And using evidence-based data to enhance your proposals. Some of those grant applications, they ask for a lot of information. So it's important and it's very helpful when you have evidence-based data to support your application. And you want to maintain strong compliance systems to ensure eligibility and reduce audit risks. So in other words, you want to make sure that once you get the funds, right, that's step one. You want to make sure that you can complete everything outlined in the grant so that you have a program manager who is managing that grant, ensuring that expenses are getting coded correctly. ensuring you have that you have an accounting software that can accommodate multiple segments, including a grant segment, so that you can allocate expenses to that grant code so that you can accurately report on the grant spending. So I oftentimes we see a lot of people put the cart before the horse, so to speak, and they, will get grants and maybe get some large grants, but they, don't have the accounting software that can support different grant codes so that they can manage the expenses. Or they haven't thought about the time and effort reporting requirement and what that means, and what those requirements are. So it's important to think about those when we talk about grant strategy. And building collaborations with local organizations and businesses. Collaboration with local organizations can provide essential support. And it can also enhance service delivery through shared resources and community engagement. Some examples that I've seen of that, sometimes health centers may have, a food pantry inside the health center. Maybe they'll partner with a local food pantry to get food to the health center so that the patient, can come and get all of those services in one place. So thinking about those opportunities to collaborate, engaging maybe with the local businesses that are around your health center or near your health center, getting them engaged can also help get the word out about your health center. And it's important that we have the opportunity to share these examples with each other, right? So, I think networking and talking about these different partnerships or these different ideas can be really important. At the health center that I worked at, we had a partnership with a hospital, and the hospital actually provided an OBGYN and a certified nurse midwife. So we would care for the patients, the pregnant women, when they came in, and we would, see them throughout their pregnancy. And then to deliver the baby, they would go to the hospital. Deliveries are, make hospitals a lot of money. So it was, the hospital saw it as a benefit for us to help care for these pregnant women and then send them to the hospital for the actual delivery. And it, allowed the health center to provide those services for the women. So that's an example of, working maybe with your local hospital, to get these kind of services. Okay, so next we're going to talk about value-based care and alternative funding models. And I know you all have heard of value-based care, or maybe are engaged in some value-based care contracts. And we've been hearing about value-based care for many, many years, right? They've been talking about this shift from, fee for service or volume more to quality outcomes, and rewarding those quality outcomes. And really the goal of value-based care is to have better outcomes, lower costs, improve patient experience, and better clinician experience. So the value-based care models rely on performance metrics such as quality measures, cost targets, patient satisfaction. They're used by government payers, commercial insurers, accountable care organizations, and health systems. So some of the key terms in value-based care: alternative payment models. APMs incentivize high quality, cost efficient care rather than volume. They may include upside risk, downside risk, or both, depending on the design. So it's important that you assess those risks. Benchmarks. These are performance standards that determine whether providers earn incentive payments or face penalties. Benchmarks must be carefully calibrated. Too strict discourages participation, and too lenient fails to control costs. Downside risk. Under two-sided risk, providers share in savings when they perform well, but also repay losses if they exceed cost targets. This makes financial accountability a central element, and it kind of shares in that financial accountability. And the last term here is population-based payments. Providers accept responsibility for managing total costs and outcomes for a defined patient population in exchange for set payments. So those are some key terms to think about when we were talking about value-based care. And there are four major models that we have today. Pay for performance. Providers receive bonus payments for meeting quality, patient, and efficiency targets. This is a light risk model layered on top of fee for service. We have bundled payments. A single payment covers an episode, like a joint replacement or hospital stay. Providers keep savings if they deliver more care more efficiently than the benchmark cost. Then we have the shared savings, shared risk. Providers continue fee-for-service billing, but are evaluated annually against a spending target. Shared savings, providers keep a portion of underspending. In the shared risk, they repay a portion of overspending. And then capitation. Providers receive per member per month payments to manage all or some of a patient's care. And that's the highest risk, but does offer the most flexibility. And CMS is increasingly embedding value-based principles into Medicare. The proposed changes, more value-based care aligned payment adjustments, support for chronic care management, technology-enabled services, efficiency adjustments, and shifts in practice expense calculations that favor independent practices over hospital-based clinicians. And the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation Models for 2026, we have the Access model. It's technology-enabled chronic disease management that includes wearables, apps, and remote monitoring. Tempo model ensures digital health devices are available for use in new care models. Team and ASM, episode-based payment model, and Wiser, a model aimed at reducing inappropriate services via prior authorizations. And then I just put a nice chart here. If you're a visual person or a visual learner like I am, I like to see things. It's helpful for me to see things in a chart, kind of to show what it rewards, the risk level that it involves, the provider incentives, and some examples. So that's a nice little chart to refer back to. And implementing value-based initiatives in community settings. So develop partnerships, practical steps for adopting value-based care with community health centers includes pilot programs, partnerships, and performance measure approaches. And why value-based care matters. Well, it matters because it's becoming central to federal and commercial reimbursement. And it's becoming that way because of rising healthcare costs, the need for chronic disease management solutions, advancements in digital health and data sharing, consumer expectations for better care coordination, and a government push toward predictability and a government push toward quality for patients. And I've seen value-based care, it's a great thing because not only does it offer a revenue stream for health centers, but it also ensures quality care for the patient. So it's kind of, killing two birds with one stone, so to speak. And I have seen community health centers that have participated in contracts, and I've seen them, get, upwards of $1 million in shared savings. And what that has allowed them to do is, they either can invest that money, they can use it for this particular health center. Because of rising healthcare costs, they weren't able to, give employees across the board an increase. So they were able to use the value-based care revenue that they generated and then give that back as a bonus to their employees. So it's definitely a win-win situation. So assessing risk and long-term sustainability. So it's important to identify financial risks and recognize potential threats. If you've probably done or heard of, SWOT analysis. Often when you're strategizing or doing your strategic plans, you may have looked at a SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. that could be beneficial here so that you understand what all of those things are, and that you quantify the risk. So measure the potential financial consequences to prioritize the risks effectively, and focus on addressing the most critical risks to enhance organizational resilience. So financial scenario simulations or scenario planning is one way to do that. Having, a forecasting, being able to forecast out maybe throughout different scenarios. So especially with, the cuts in Medicaid that we know are coming, how does that impact your health center? What are you doing to understand what those impacts could be? And putting together a financial forecast, a scenario plan can really lay out what that means specifically to the bottom line when we're talking about, how are the Medicaid cuts going to affect me? So there are, and you can look at various scenarios that your health center may be facing and sort of forecast out, and it's also important to, consider doing pro formas when you are going to be adding a service line. So if you're going to be adding dental or you want to add behavioral health services, what does that look like for your health center? How many visits do you think you will get? What will be the reimbursement for those and how much is it going to cost? So really evaluating that to understand the risk that you will be taking on. And then obviously, if you're taking on, maybe you are adding a service line, maybe you're adding two service lines, thinking about timing of those can also be important, because maybe you should add one this year and wait till next year because of the upfront cost that it may be to add those. And then also doing a stress test. So I think of stress testing as, it's a test to see how well your health center may react to some of these stressors. And we'll talk a little bit about that here coming up.
Hey, Katie, real quick, we had a question in the chat. It said,
Yes.
is it still Forbes's perspective that it takes 2 years for a new service line to get up and running?
Well, I think it really depends. I think it depends on the service line. I think it depends on how well you can integrate it. So I think it really depends. I think you could probably get it up and running faster than that. Just depends on the need, right? Have you done a needs assessment? That's another important thing, is making sure that there is need for it in our community, because the needs may differ based on whether you're a rural health clinic or you're more urban. The needs for your patients may be different. So that's why the performers are really important, to really figure out at what point am I going to break even and start making money. So I don't know that I would say after 2 years it would be up and running. I think it really just depends.
Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome. So again, this scenario planning helps anticipate your best case and worst case scenario, so you can look at both sides. Looking at your return on investment is important, right? I feel like in the community health center space, oftentimes maybe we will have a service line that doesn't necessarily make us money, but we know that it is the best for our patients and creates the best experience for our patients. And so we may rely on another service line that does make money to cover up the shortfall for that service line. I see that a lot in the health center space. And I think that's kind of just par for the course. And so it's important to look at your return on investment and see what that is. And if there's not going to be a return on investment, can the money we make from some of our other service lines cover, or make up for the loss in another service line? And again, making sure that you're looking at mission aligned services, that they support your mission and enhance your organizational stability. And these types of modeling and the ROI analysis, it helps financial leaders not only present and show that information to maybe the CEO or the board so that you know what you are dealing with and you know what you need to monitor going forward and how to get to those goals. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about stress testing. So I think most of you probably remember, I think it's been a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, you may have been affected by the Change Healthcare breach, right? That's one of those things that we can't we can't plan for. Well, we can plan for it kind of, but one of those things that happens where we have to then adjust and change because it affected a lot of people. Some people, had delays in payment, claims weren't getting processed. And so we're at risk for those types of things to happen. And so how can we think about those things and how can we sort of prepare for those disruptions that we don't necessarily have control over? So stress tests simulate real world disruptions to reveal vulnerabilities and contingency plans and ensure preparedness. Um, and it will uncover gaps in staffing, technology, communication, and resource allocation before the crisis occurs. Stress test enhances resilience, minimizes downtime, and the stress testing can build confidence, right? Can build confidence in your plans and build confidence that you can, that you can get through anything. So when doing stress testing, it's important to define the stress test purpose. So clarify what the stress test aims to learn. So if you're trying to do a disruption in service, or if you want to look at recovery speed after disruption, there's been a lot of cyber attacks over the years, and so you want to make sure that that's always a possibility. And so, what plans do you have in place, or what do you have in place to ensure that if something like that would happen, that you can still serve your patients? So identifying critical functions, so determine essential operations that can tolerate prolonged downtime, like patient care and payroll systems. Set downtime limits and dependencies. Establish maximum allowable downtime and dependencies for each critical function to guide your stress testing. And then recording priorities helps in your scenario selection and resource allocation during the exercise. So choosing realistic stress scenarios. So you could select, this says 2 to 4. You could even do one, select a high stress scenario like staff shortage or tech failure, financial shock, or severe weather. Define clear assumptions for each scenario, such as, what's the percentage of staff that would be unavailable or the duration of the outage. Avoid vague conditions to ensure participants understand constraints and respond effectively during tests. And recording assumptions helps compare performance across tests and track organizational improvements over time. I know we also had one state that was transitioning to a new payment portal, and there were some hiccups with that payment portal, and which led to health centers not getting reimbursed. There was a delay in their reimbursement. So again, one of those scenarios that is, out of our control. And so we have to do, what we can to prepare for those and get through them the best that we can. So map workflow and conduct the simulation. So identify task responsibilities and required resources and alternative methods for critical processes under stress. So if your technology would go down, what alternative methods, would you move to? You can conduct cost-effective tabletop exercises where key staff review response steps in a controlled environment. And you can use live or partial simulations to test systems by disabling services or simulating demand surges. And then document challenges, workarounds, and decisions to improve performance and contingency plans. I know that with all of the cybersecurity and how important that has become, there are ways that you can use that to, it's not really I don't know that I would consider it a stress test, but sometimes you may have your IT send out, intentional phishing emails to see, how many of your staff are clicking on those emails to see, how at risk your organization to have a cyber attack or to be, so it's important that you are doing those kinds of things to ensure that your staff is trained and they're informed about cybersecurity and how important it is to not click on certain emails, not open certain attachments. And so doing those tests can help you figure out, is my staff trained? Do we need more training? It can help you sort of pinpoint that and identify that. I knew of a breach where they ended up getting the CEO's email, and because they didn't have a policy where, some organizations will have a policy where, after 2 years, your emails get deleted, right? And this person had probably 20 years of emails in there because the organization didn't have a policy to, clear out those emails. So the person who did the cyber attack, they ended up getting access to all of that. And as you can imagine, it caused, a real problem because there were so many emails that they had access to. So making sure that you have systems in place is really important. So measuring performance and identify gaps, evaluate organizational response with metrics like timeliness, quality, and communication clarity to reveal strengths and weaknesses. Identify operational gaps such as missing backups, incomplete workflows, and unclear communication revealed during the simulations. And make sure that you thoroughly document the findings. That will help guide leadership in prioritizing which actions you need to take and how to allocate resources effectively. And then develop actions and contingency plans. So if you don't have, if you don't already have contingency plans in place for these types of things, that might be something that you want to look at. Developing specific actions, identify improvement actions with clear owners, timelines, and priorities to address the gaps. And you want to make sure you're updating your contingency plan. Things change so quickly, it seems like. And so, a contingency plan that you had 2 or 3 years ago may not be applicable anymore. So you want to make sure that you are not just doing the contingency plan and putting it in the drawer and not looking at it again, but making sure that you are assessing it and reviewing it and updating it as things change. And you want to make sure that you're communicating and with all of your staff. So ensuring that all the updates are shared with staff and integrated into training programs for effective crisis response. And, as I mentioned, the contingency plan, it's a living document. So it needs to be assessed on a regular basis for, when things change. So retest and continuous improvement. So schedule, you can do these tests, annually, or maybe after you've had a major organizational change to maintain readiness. Each retest should include the lessons from the previous test, right? And continuing testing ensures staff confidence and capability during actual disruptions. And repeated tests creates a culture where contingency planning is integral to the operations. So establishing benchmarks for financial health. So key financial metrics help set measurable goals that track organizational sustainability and growth, and monitoring those benchmarks and ensuring continuous improvement and risk management. And benchmarks can help you guide decisions to sustain and enhance long-term organizational performance. So prioritizing initiatives for the greatest impact. So using structured frameworks allows us to objectively assess potential initiatives based on impact, feasibility, and alignment with strategic goals. A lot of times, going back to talking about grants management and grants management strategy, and talking about, feasibility analysis and should we take on this grant? Does it make sense? There are a lot of options for like decision matrix that you can look at and have, the stakeholders in your organization complete that matrix. And then depending on how that matrix scores will decide, it will tell you whether you should take on that grant or not. That's, a lot of times if you're a larger organization and you have a lot of grants that you're considering, you may not need that at a smaller organization, but it's best to get all stakeholders involved when you're talking about grants, because grants affect sort of everyone, right? So, whoever is writing it, HR is involved, finance is involved, it affects operations. So make sure that you have those key stakeholders at the table when you are deciding on grants so that everybody can give, their assessment about whether that grant makes sense for the organization. So aligning financial priorities with organizational mission. So again, mission-driven funding. That's sort of a theme here. We've continued to talk about that. Your funding decisions should support the health center's core mission to ensure aligned priorities. One of the health centers that I worked at, they decided that they wanted to publish a magazine. And me being in a finance role, I thought that was a crazy idea because I didn't think that it really fit with the mission. But I got outvoted, so we ended up publishing a magazine for a few years, and it didn't really make a lot of sense, and it didn't work out long term. And so that's one example of just really looking at, does this make sense with our mission? Is it going to support our mission? Is it going to further our mission? And trying to ensure that things are aligned. That doesn't mean, don't think outside the box. It's definitely important to think outside the box. But you want to also consider, does it align with the mission?
Hey, Katie, we've got another question in the chat. It says, what are
Sure.
the detriments if you don't follow that methodology?
Which methodology?
David, do you care to clarify? You can come off mute if you want, or you can throw it in the chat.
I was talking about your grants, how you went through like a stair step like process. So like, what if all the stakeholders aren't involved? It was more of like, give me a couple of examples of not following an ideal philosophical approach from Forbes's perspective and what could happen. Like, give me an example of, like, let's say we get a grant, but we don't get all the stakeholders. What could we potentially see as an outcome?
Right. That's a great question. So when we're talking about grants, and if you don't have all the stakeholders at the table, let's say the CEO wants to go after a grant, they have great grant writing skills, they go after the grant, they get the grant, that's fantastic, everyone is happy. And then what we often see is it's great that we got the grant, but then there's no implementation of the grant. So the implementation of the grant is what we see that is lacking a lot of times. And what does that mean? That means, when you submit a grant application, you have to have a budget, right? And so you want to include your finance team because they're the ones that are going to be most knowledgeable about your budget and, what you're going to need. So you definitely need somebody from the finance team to be providing input. A lot of times we see that doesn't happen. And then after the fact, it's given to finance and it's like, oh, here we created this budget. And it's like, well, where did you get that budget? We don't, that's not really accurate. So you need to have somebody from the finance team, and finance and HR are very interconnected. Let's say you're going after a grant that you're going to be hiring 10 new employees. Well, if you have one HR person and they don't have the capacity to recruit and hire 10 new employees right away, then that's something that you need to consider. And they need to be at the table to, let you know what their capacity is. And then so you also need, a program manager, or I call it, you need to identify someone as the owner of the grant, right? And that owner is responsible for making sure, working with finance to review expenses every month and make sure that you have time and effort reporting and that expenses are allocated there. Oftentimes, when that doesn't happen, we see that the funds go unspent. So here you've been given this money, but we haven't tracked the expenses in our general ledger appropriately. So we can't invoice appropriately. We can't draw down funds. We can't report. We can't follow the reporting guidelines, and therefore we can't get access to the money. Or we just don't spend it in the period of time that we were given to spend the money because we won the grant and everybody just kind of forgot about it. Also on the audit side of things, when we're talking about these federal grants, they can be audited. If you receive over $1 million, you're subject to the single audit during your financial audit. And so they are looking at, are you coding expenses correctly? Are you doing drawdowns correctly? Did you spend the money in the proper time period? And so if those things aren't happening, you can get, a finding on your audit, or you could get a material weakness. And when that happens, then, then you're not considered a low risk auditee anymore, right? And so when you're a high risk auditee, that bumps you into a different category. And I've never seen, I've seen people get, have findings on their audit related to grant, reporting and allocating things correctly. And it could impact your ability to get further grants. So there is a lot that I think, people don't realize when it comes to grant and how much it entails. That's why I always like to have, a grant committee, that has those main stakeholders, and that they are collectively, completing something like a grant matrix, a decision matrix, so that everyone's opinion is being considered before making the decision. And of course, there have been lots of times where, working at a health center, I, didn't think we should go after the grant, but the other people thought we did. And so, you just move on, and you win some, you lose some. But it's important that all of those key stakeholders are at the table to offer their, opinion, their capacity about what they can handle. So I hope that made sense. There's also risk for overspending, right? If we're not tracking our spending, we can underspend, we can overspend. And it's never fun to go back to a funder and say, oh, hey, we didn't spend all this money, but we'd like you to fund us again next year. So it can make that a little bit more challenging. And so, yeah, I can't really stress grants management is so important when we talk about revenue diversification and making sure that that's an option. So aligning financial priorities with organizational mission, I kind of forget where I was at. Just again, making sure that it aligns with your mission, and looking at the long-term viability of those programs, right, that we talked about, doing modeling, looking at your ROI on certain things. Implementation and risk management. So implementation roadmap. So a clear roadmap with short-term and long-term phases enables structured diversification implementation. Immediate actions like applying for grants and forming partnerships create early progress with minimal investment. Longer term strategic goals like expansion of services, infrastructure investment, and social enterprise initiatives, those are going to drive longer term growth. Monitoring and adjustment. So making sure that you're establishing KPIs and reviewing this regularly. So again, similar to contingency plans, you don't want to do this and then just put it in the drawer and sort of forget about it. You want to make sure that you are establishing regular reviews to ensure accountability and making sure, with how quickly things change, maybe priorities, they evolve quickly. And so we may need to make adjustments to our plans based on the changes that are happening. So we have to remain flexible, right? I feel like that's a key word in the health center space, right? Is flexibility. There are so many examples I could give that require us to be flexible, and diversifying your revenue is another one. So risks and mitigation. Pursuing too many initiatives can strain resources and reduce organizational effectiveness. Again, we see this a lot. Taking on too many initiatives, trying to get into three schools at the same time for school-based health services. Not that that's a bad idea, but again, just making sure that you have the data to back up that you can support that you have the staffing. We need our CEOs to be thinking big, and we love that. And then I feel like it's our job as finance staff to say, that's an awesome idea. Here are the risks and challenges we may face with that, right? And things don't always go our way, but I feel like that's our role, is to show the effect that this decision could have. New funding sources require robust systems to ensure regulatory adherence and avoid compliance issues. So just like we were just talking about the grants. So an example I'll give, and you probably hear me talk about a lot, is time and effort reporting. A lot of health centers aren't even sure what that is or what that means. And it just means that if I'm working on a grant, that I'm allocating my time and my effort to that grant, and that is documented. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a fan of paper. And so I always ensure that my time and effort reporting is incorporated in my payroll system, so that when an employee is completing a timesheet, they're saying what grant they work on their timesheet. And the onus is on the employee to know what grant they are working on. This requires, training of your staff, and your staff to know, what grant they're funded by. But I think that that's a critical part of being a nonprofit and receiving grants, is that, employees are educated about grants and about what it means to be funded by a grant, and helping them understand that. Addressing workforce and capacity requirements. It supports expanded services and effective grant management. So again, if we've got a grant, we're hiring 20 people and I've got one HR person, they may not be able to recruit people as quickly as you need them to. So considering staffing and capacity is extremely important. Prioritizing initiatives, invest in compliance infrastructure, again, making sure you have the right accounting software, making sure you know what grants you have, and developing workforce plans for sustainability is really important. So risks and mitigation, this is just continued. So again, you want to make sure that it's critical to get buy-in from leadership, right? We don't want to make decisions in a vacuum. We all want to feel like we're contributing, and that our opinion matters. And so it's important to get buy-in. Some of these diversification efforts, require change in your organization. And a lot of times it's about managing that change, and helping people understand the how and the why can go a long way in supporting that change throughout the organization. Role assignment and timelines, assigning clear roles and setting timelines ensures accountability. Again, I'll give the grant example, making sure that you have someone that owns that grant that is going to say, yes, I own this, and I will make sure that, I'm working with the necessary team to make sure that we meet program requirements and finance requirements. Engaging stakeholders across the organization fosters alignment and builds a culture of innovation. I would also say it builds a culture of connection as well, right? We all want to feel included and a part of. And so being a part of these decisions can help support that. And revenue diversification supports sustainability, growth, and positive community impact, within our ever evolving healthcare landscape. So in conclusion here, diversifying funding streams helps increase financial stability and reduce dependency on a single income source. You want to make sure that you're exploring innovative revenue streams that support growth and long-term financial health for healthcare centers. Embracing value-based care, right? So looking more into value-based care, we know that that's sort of the way things are going. And so how can you be a part of that process and adopting these value-based care initiatives? Assess risks and prioritize initiatives. So make sure that you're evaluating the risks and focusing and prioritizing on key initiatives to ensure sustainable financial management and quality care. So those are all of my slides. There was one other thing that I wanted to mention that I think is really important. Also is the relationship you have with your bank, right? What kind of a relationship do you have with your bank? Do you have a person that is dedicated to you all? Do you have an account executive that you can work with? They should be working with you and a partner with you, for maybe they can help you with investment strategies if that's, not your thing or not what you're super knowledgeable in, but making sure that you're using all your resources. I have found that I underestimated the relationship with my banking account executive. And when I started to network more with them, it really helped. And it also helped me learn about all the other services that the bank offers, making sure you're on the right platform. I know that, when you're a smaller healthcare organization or a smaller health center, you may be dealing with maybe a smaller local bank that doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles of these other platforms. But again, I just wanted to stress that the relationship with your banking account executive, and if you don't know who that is, reach out and ask them. They can really be a resource for you to help you think about some of these decisions, or how should I be investing? We have $1 million in savings. What should I have it in savings, or should I have it in a money market account? Asking those types of questions. So I did want to mention that.
Thank you, Katie. This was a very helpful and great session today. I do want to open the floor up to see if anybody has any questions they want to throw in the chat or maybe come off mute. And we will be sharing Katie's slides out following this meeting, so you have that for reference in your tool belt.
Yeah, and if you don't have any questions now, but you think of something later, like, oh, I wish I would have asked, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or the KPCA or Stephanie. We're here to be a partner and to work with the KPCA and all of its members to, answer questions and be a support. So if there's something that you think of or want a clarification on, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Katie. We are very, very thankful for Forbes's partnership. Well, before we close out today, I do just have one very, very quick little mention about the WRAP work group that is ongoing. So following this meeting, I will be sending you the minutes from last week's WRAP work group. But if you have any topics or suggestions or issues that you want to be going to this meeting going forward, please send them to me in an email, and I will be happy to compile them on everyone's behalf and take it to that work group and then share those issues within the RevCycle listserv. And then if you are not getting the revenue cycle emails and you want to get added, just shoot me an email, and it's a very quick process. So with that being said, I think that concludes our session today. Thank you, Katie, again, and everybody stay warm out there, and we'll see you guys in February.
Hey, thank you so much. Let me check while I got you on the phone here.